Former U.S. President Donald Trump wins by a landslide in the opening contest for the 2024 presidential election. His rivals promise to turn the game around, but can they? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. He didn't show up to any debates. He's spending a lot of time in court defending himself from 91 felony charges, and he's leading the Republican contest for the White House. Former U.S. President Donald Trump showed how much his base has faith in him by winning the Iowa caucuses by a huge margin. CGTN's Dan Williams has this report from Des Moines.
Some 30 minutes after it began, as many people were still caucusing, came the news. The former U.S. President Donald Trump had won the Iowa caucuses. It was a landslide victory, a record win, a statement win. Almost 3 years after leaving the White House, and despite a variety of legal issues, Trump won the first election contest of 2024 and is in prime position to become the Republican presidential nominee.
The big night is going to be in November, when we take back our country, and truly, we do make our country great again. Thank you very much, everybody.
The other matchup of interest focused on who would finish second and be the top alternative to Trump. In the end, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis edged out former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, but both some 30 percentage points behind Trump.
Because of your support, in spite of all of that they threw at us, everyone against us, we've got our ticket punched out of Iowa.
Polls had predicted Haley might finish in second. Despite the disappointment of finishing third, she too is vowing to remain in the race.
Thank you, Iowa. We're going to continue on. We're going to make you proud, and we're off to New Hampshire. Thank you very much.
The freezing cold weather appeared to impact voter turnout, and it was significantly lower than the 2016 caucuses. But across the state, Republican voters still brave the elements, determined to have their say.
I voted for President Trump because I think he has a proven record of what he can do when he's in office.
I voted for Ron DeSantis. I'm looking for someone to cancel the chaos. I'm sick of being gaslit for not being loyal to a former president who wasn't loyal to us.
Donald Trump, I liked what he did the first 4 years. I'd like to see him have a chance to finish the job.
So this year's race for the White House is underway. The focus now switches to New Hampshire, the second stop in the long primary race. That vote takes place next week. There is still the prospect for twists and turns, not least the potential impact of Trump's legal issues. But given Trump's dominance here, the Republican nomination race is already beginning to look like a procession. Dan Williams, CGTN, Des Moines, Iowa.
Okay, let's bring in our panel. Adolfo Franco is an attorney and Republican strategist. He joins us from Orlando in Florida. From Decatur in Georgia, Bill Crane is a political analyst and columnist. Here in Washington, D.C., Joseph Williams is a former senior editor for U.S. News and World Report. And Brian Becker, joining us from New York, is the executive director of the Answer Coalition. Welcome to all of you. Adolfo, a landslide win for Donald Trump in Iowa, the highest win for any non-incumbent president, 51% of the vote, more than double the second-placed Ron DeSantis. I think it's safe to say that this is not a surprise. He was expected to win, but now that the ballots have been cast, we've seen the numbers. What does it look like?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, you're absolutely right. Just because one wins in Iowa, we don't have a President Santorum, we don't have a President Huckabee, we don't have a President Cruz. However, that said, the margin, I grew up in Iowa, and I participated in caucuses since 1974. The margin here is just unbelievable. He won all 99 counties. Behind those numbers, he won with people under 30 years of age. He won with older voters. He won with moderate voters. He won every single segment and analysis that was done. So it was well beyond what's sometimes called his base. He's appealing to a wide range of Republicans that are not necessarily even what's traditionally called the MAGA base. So it's an enormous victory that is a little, not more than a little, unprecedented. So it's on to New Hampshire. I think the difference is now, I mentioned others have not won. Years and years ago, when Ronald Reagan lost Iowa's caucuses in 1980, there were 30 days between Iowa and New Hampshire. Now it's only a week between now and New Hampshire, where he has the momentum, President Trump. It's very clear, and I don't think this is a surprise either, that Donald Trump, unless something happens that's beyond his control, Donald Trump is on the way to win the nomination. Even losing New Hampshire, which is unlikely, he would win in South Carolina. Remember, John McCain lost in Iowa in 2000, and he won the New Hampshire primary by double digits, and who became president was George Bush.
Right.
So this is a ratification that Donald Trump is on the way to the nomination.
Bill Crane, what's your view on Trump's performance on Monday night?
He had a great night. He won 98 of 99 counties, but there were 770,000 registered voters in Iowa who are Republican voters in the party. 110,000 of them caucused last night. I think the New York Times put its hand on the scale a little bit, calling the election about 30 minutes into the caucus before balloting had even started. Donald Trump had a decisive win, but as was just pointed out by the prior panelist, Rick Santorum won in 2016. And in 2012, excuse me, I said that backwards. In 2012 and 2016, Ted Cruz won. Ted Cruz came in third. Rick Santorum came in fourth in New Hampshire. This race is far from over. Donald Trump's legal challenges remain ahead of him. He comes out with quite a head of steam behind him, but the challenges he faces are not going anywhere. Joe Biden is still a weak candidate, but other Republicans, particularly Nikki Haley, do better in head-to-head matchup polling with Joe Biden than Donald Trump does. In New Hampshire, the largest block of registered voters are independents, and they can vote in either caucus. And in Iowa, in the exit polling data, about half of Governor Haley's sample vote were independents who came into that Republican caucus.
Bill, what happens to Nikki Haley now? I mean, there was a lot of focus on Nikki Haley. She was getting a lot of attention, but she finished third. She is polling well ahead of the New Hampshire primary, but where does this leave her campaign?
Well, it's not where she would have liked to have been, but she's still leading, the second choice in New Hampshire. She's narrowed that race to low double digits and in some polls, single digits. I think it's actually better for her that Ron DeSantis stays in the race, because if Ron DeSantis had lost last night and she'd come in closer, if DeSantis gets out, just like Vivek Ramaswamy dropping out today, most of that base and that vote goes to Donald Trump. So she needs to basically demonstrate Donald Trump is vulnerable. If she either takes New Hampshire or comes in a very close second, the following state is South Carolina, which is her home state. Remember what South Carolina did for Joe Biden in 2020.
Right.
So again, there's a certain inevitability that's being forecast by some pollsters, some of the intelligentsia, the Beltway crowd, and certain legacy media outlets, but the voting has just started. New Hampshire is a true primary with 1 million registered voters.
Joseph Williams, Nikki Haley, she's exuding a lot of confidence. She says essentially this is going to be a two-horse race. It's going to be Nikki Haley against Joe Biden. She says 70% of the country does not want another Trump-Biden election. And we've seen that in many polls. People don't want to vote for either Trump nor Biden. But it does seem to be heading that way, doesn't it?
For all intents and purposes, yeah, it does. Mostly because you don't have viable candidates on either side of the spectrum. President Biden is the president, so by nature of that, he's the incumbent. President Trump, although the voting has only begun, and he still has kind of a series of challenges against him, so it's not like he's running without headwinds. It does look like we're going to have a matchup of two relatively weak candidates, given what was on the slate in 2016 and in 2020. So I think that what's going to happen is Nikki Haley is going to try to preserve as much capital as she can, try to make a good showing in New Hampshire, it's looking kind of grim for her, or at least grimmer than it should be in South Carolina. I mean, she's polling ahead, but she's not polling as strong as Donald Trump. And it looks like she may be in for a bit of an awakening in South Carolina. We'll see. But I think that the point remains that it's very early in the contest. Anything can happen. In politics, 6 to 8 months is a lifetime and no time at all. So I think barring any unforeseen circumstances and some of the unknown, how did Donald Rumsfeld put it? Some of the known unknowns, i.e., how the voting public is going to react to Donald Trump's criminal cases, where those criminal cases are going to go, whether or not he's going to get convicted or not. Those are some known unknowns that I think could affect everything between now and the fall, and could really have an impact on the Republican primary, depending on how far it breaks on what happens between now and then.
Right, Joseph, as you say, is a long way to go, but even President Biden thinks it's going to be a rematch. In fact, he posted on X after Monday night's result, in which he said, looks like Donald Trump just won Iowa. He's the clear frontrunner on the other side at this point. But here's the thing. This election was always going to be between you and me versus extreme MAGA Republicans. It was true yesterday, and it'll be true tomorrow. Now, I know this is very early in the game, but Biden has framed his campaign as a fight for democracy. Is that a winning strategy?
It depends. I mean, again, it's really early to tell. But I think what he's trying to do is frame and will Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee. This is the frame that Biden wants, and there's no more representation of pure MAGA than Donald Trump. And that's the race that President Biden wants to run. He wants to run against Donald Trump. He wants to run against MAGA to avoid it being made a referendum on his own record in office. I mean, not that his record is horrible, but that a lot of people have a dim view of his presidency, and he wants to run against he wants to run against a candidate who is almost as unpopular as he is. You look at the favorability polls, he and Donald Trump are basically running neck and neck with 40%, give or take, unfavorability ratings in a lot of those polls. So I think this is President Biden trying to get ahead and trying to frame the race around the opponent that he wants to have, the one he thinks will be the easiest to defeat.
Brian Becker, we've had all kinds of explanations on Donald Trump's popularity, but there was a piece in the New York Times which quoted a former Republican representative in Iowa, and the quote was, a lot of people who support Donald Trump really are fed up with democracy, representative democracy. They think that an authoritarian style of government would probably be preferable at this point in order to save the nation. And that piece in the New York Times also went on to say that there is extreme voter anger. Voter anger, it said, at public institutions remains sky high. Are those fair points?
Well, I don't know about whether people want an authoritarian form of government. I do think that more than half of the Republicans were convinced after the 2020 election that the election had been stolen from Donald Trump, that it was based on fraud. And as a consequence, the big part of the Republican Party voters, and that would be more than 35 million people, 70+ million voted for Trump, consider the current U.S. government to be fundamentally illegitimate because it's based on fraud. So if you have tens of millions of people thinking that, who believe that the election is invalid or should be invalidated based on the fact that it was premised on corruption and fraud, that's, you know, a lot of kindling for a bigger fire in terms of people thinking that this form of government is no longer viable. Let's remember, after 2016, huge number of Democrats felt that the Kremlin was responsible for Donald Trump having won the presidency. Both notions were nonsense. I mean, Trump lost the election. He lost the popular vote in 2020 by 7 million. He narrowly lost the Electoral College. No one in any court, ruled on his behalf. And yet tens of millions of people who voted for Trump agreed with Donald Trump that it was a stolen election. So we have a basic destabilization in American politics. People who used to think, and this goes for people on both sides, that Democrats and Republicans, that the system is sort of an exhibition of a real democracy and something that should be promoted around the world. They no longer think that. So There's severe polarization going on. So again, this is kindling for Donald Trump's basic political line.
And there's so much that needs to be explained here. I mean, after Iowa, Trump flew to New York, where he appeared in court. He's appearing in court on that defamation lawsuit. Question is, how does one explain that, you know, the billionaire son of a millionaire has cast, I mean, and he's facing 91 felonies, but he's cast himself as the voice of the working class in America? Brian?
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, again, people are looking for answers. I mean, Donald Trump sort of demagogically said he was going to impose tariffs on China. He was going to impose a trade war on all of the different countries of the world, that he was going to bring jobs back to the United States. And as a consequence, some part of the U.S. working class, which has been badly hurt by the last 3 decades of neoliberal capitalist policies, we're looking for some solution, some salvation. No jobs really came back to the United States. That was complete nonsense. And then the other thing that Donald Trump did, which I think is extremely dangerous, is he poisoned the well by saying all of the problems that exist in working class communities are the consequence of immigrants, are the consequence of Muslims, are the consequence of the other. In other words, stirring the pot of kind of national chauvinism and racism. And again, that plays for a certain part of the population that is hurting economically, that is looking for answers. Those are not answers, but demagogically, they fill the void.
Adolfo, let's look at the next part of the race, and that takes us to New Hampshire. There are some in the media who believe Nikki Haley poses a formidable challenge to Trump. NPR, which is the national public radio network in the United States, says, and I'm quoting here, as Nikki Haley polls well, there's talk she could upset Trump in New Hampshire. Newsweek magazine says, quoting again, Donald Trump is nervous about New Hampshire. There's a new poll out. Bill was talking about some polls earlier on, but there's a new poll out that has Trump and Haley in a dead heat with 40 points apiece. Can Haley break that stranglehold that Trump has on the party?
Well, my goodness, on this program, the sources that are quoted are the New York Times, NPR, and Newsweek. It's time we start looking at the Wall Street Journal and conservative media and others, not the stacked liberal media that is desperate to destroy President Trump. I think the problem, we've had this program over and over, is we don't talk about Joe Biden. I disagree with Joseph. Joe Biden is at 33% approval, the lowest approval rating in decades. By way of comparison, his low point, his entire administration, Donald Trump had an approval rating of 36% was his low. Joe Biden is today at 33%.
That's basically within the margin of error, though, Adolfo.
Well, he's at the bottom of the barrel. And
they're both riding pretty low, quite honestly.
Well, can I finish my statement here?
Go ahead, Adolfo.
Is the following. Joseph's talking about democracy and MAGA and the rest of it is, look at the polling data. The #1 problem Americans identify is immigration policy and the economy. Those are American people. Those aren't just the Republicans. So, you know, we can talk all about you want and dice and splice and talk about, I don't know how many times Donald Trump. Keep at it. The more we talk about Donald Trump and his troubles and everything and strangulation and so forth strategies, his support only increases. I'll wager the guest on this program that this will be done before March, and Donald Trump will be the nominee of the Republican Party. In fact, even next week, we could see significant developments after New Hampshire. Now, of course, anything can happen. Yeah, they're right about that. Anything could happen to Joe Biden. Anything could happen to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But to suggest there is a struggle nationally, or even in these states, some are in error. You're right. New Hampshire, a lot of independents and Democrats participate. Again, John McCain, I worked for him. We won that primary by 20 points, and we lost the nomination. Bottom line on this is, you're going to start talking about Joe Biden, but that's not me.
Yeah.
That's Congressman Thompson, Benny Thompson, that's David Axelrod and others. You're getting the message wrong. Keep at it. Keep at it about being democracy and not the price of gasoline, not the price of food, not a border out of control. That's what's driving people to Donald Trump. And respecting democracy in America, the other guest is right. It depends on your perspective. Millions of Americans believe our justice system is being weaponized, that Donald Trump is being persecuted. Another segment.
All right, Adolfo. I want to get to Joseph Williams. Go ahead. You wanted to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, but it's hard to argue with the facts, though, Adolfo. I mean, I really admire your willingness to stand up for your guy, but I mean, facts are facts. We have approval.
One moment, Adolfo. Let Joseph finish.
And you can only account for Iowa to a certain degree because that was only Republicans voting, and Donald Trump has a very high enthusiasm rating in Iowa. Outside of Iowa, less so. I'm just saying that it's not a lock. I don't think it's as much of a lock as you believe.
Well, Joseph, let's be on this program next week.
Okay.
When he wins the New Hampshire primary, what are you going to say?
Okay, I want to get to Bill Crane. Bill Crane wants to say something. Bill, go ahead.
Iowa matters, but it's 90% white folks. It's very much a conservative Republican controlled by its Christian right. Despite the governor of Iowa and one of the leading evangelists there endorsing Ron DeSantis, the bulk of evangelists who were not with Donald Trump in 2016 are with him now in Iowa. I'm not sure they follow him to all 50 states. We need to remember, we don't have a national election for president. We have 50 different state elections.
Okay, Bill,
I'm not the anchor. I'm not the anchor.
Donald Trump will win the primary,
I have to have a question.
Nominee.
Okay, we can't hear Bill. Adolfo, give Bill a moment. Bill, I've got another question I'm going to ask you, Bill. You know, as expected, I'm going to get to a point that Adolfo raised earlier in the show. You know, as expected, Trump did very well with voters in rural Iowa, which are home to many evangelical voters. But he also did well in suburban communities around Des Moines. And Newsweek reports, sorry, Adolfo, I've got to quote Newsweek again, but it reports that he was helped by the backing he secured from college-educated voters. Now, that's a demographic that in the past has not normally supported him. So, Bill, how does one explain this expanding and diverse coalition that he's pulling together?
I will agree wholeheartedly with Adolfo on one point. There are a lot of Americans distrustful and angry and frustrated with their government. Not so much one party or another, but they don't trust their government. They believe their government is out to get them, as opposed to having their back. But I would say that started after 9/11, during the 2008 market crash, when nobody went to prison. It's become worse and fomented by a former president and nominee who tells his supporters that the government is out to get you, that I'm here for you. They're not attacking me, they're attacking you. He very effectively has positioned himself as an incumbent president seeking re-election, even though he's not. And we think back, there haven't been that many presidents who've lost the office and then returned later to run again. Teddy Roosevelt being one of the few who stepped away for 4 years, came back, wasn't happy with his self-appointed GOP successor, Grover Cleveland, and ran as a third-party candidate, receiving more votes than any third-party candidate ever has. The power of the presidency and having held that office in terms of its attraction to voters is enormous.
Okay, Brian Becker, the election's often presented as the battle between the two main parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. But to what extent does a U.S. election represent something of a class divide?
Well, very much. I mean, by the way, the college-educated Republicans and more affluent Republicans were a big part of Donald Trump's base. This idea that Donald Trump is the politician of the poor white man is essentially bogus. I mean, yes, he has poor white voters, but he had a lot of very middle-class, affluent people doing very well who liked his tax giveaway policies. So we have to not overgeneralize about what's going on. Joe Biden is an extremely unpopular president because he has done nothing or virtually nothing for working class people. The Democrats had control of the House, they had the control of the Senate and the White House in 2021 when Joe Biden became president. Very little was accomplished. We have inflation eating away at people's livelihoods. We have a lot of social and economic problems that are building up. It's not because of Biden or Trump or anything. It's really a part of the current economic system that we live under. So, but Biden will be punished. I believe he'll be punished badly in the coming election. The only reason he won in 2020 was he was able to make that a referendum on Donald Trump. So 7 million people more than voted for Republicans voted for Joe Biden, not because they loved Joe Biden, but because they didn't like Donald Trump. And Joe Biden can't really do that again. Working class and poor people, I believe in larger measures, larger numbers will not vote this time. I think Arab American voters who are angry about what's going on in Gaza, they're not going to vote for Joe Biden. And I think that's the reason Donald Trump has a very good chance of becoming president once again.
Okay, Adolfo, I know you wanted to respond to much of what's being said in the past few minutes. If you could keep it brief, please. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I want to get the others in too.
Quickly, what the other guest just said is spot on. I just could not have said it any better. But a couple of things. First of all, Donald Trump is appealing across the board. I want to ask any of the guests here, what state in the United States is Donald Trump behind? Behind any Republican. Don't tell me striking distance, behind. None. Number two,
California, maybe?
No, let me finish. Vis-a-vis all the national polls right now, the state polls, we're talking about state polls, against Biden, he's up 8 to 10 points in states like Michigan. So Donald Trump is appealing. This is MAGA stuff. President Biden is attacking half of the country. Donald Trump is appealing to the American people. And Joseph, statistics don't lie. You're right. 33% approval is lower than Donald Trump ever had. And that's where Joe Biden is, as the other guest has said. That's what the focus should be. None of these other Republican candidates will be the nominee unless President Trump, something external which could happen to Trump,
which is highly possible.
Okay, go ahead, Joseph.
Keep in mind,
it is, but it's not political.
One moment, Adolfo. Joseph, go ahead.
Keep in mind that there are other cases out there. Anything can happen. Do not ignore the fact that this president or this would-be president or this former president has a lot of scandals trailing behind him, like tin cans behind a wedding.
How many times have you heard that?
There are things that could trip him up, and there are things that a lot of moderate voters are very angry about. And if you flip the Iowa numbers on their head, there were at least 50% of the Republican electorate in Iowa chose somebody else. So I'm not saying that he's not a horrible candidate. What I am saying is that he's not the same.
One moment, Adolfo.
This has never happened. I'm from Iowa. No one has ever broken 50%. This is just ludicrous of trying to slice this up as not being a significant.
Yeah, okay. I want to get to Bill Crane very quickly. We've only got a minute left. Bill, you know, Brian mentioned the impact that the Gaza crisis is having on the Biden candidacy right now. His support among young people, among people of color, among Muslim Americans, it's plummeted. I mean, when was the last time that a foreign policy issue had such an impact on an election inside?
I tell you what's also going to hurt Joe Biden is with Jewish voters in the pocket. And by that, I mean a huge base of fundraising in states like New York, Florida, are longtime Jewish voters who typically have given their wallet share to the Democratic Party and its nominee. And I don't think they'll be there for Joe Biden. Even though he is backing Israel, he's not backing Israel in the way a lot of Israelis think he should.
Right. Okay, we are going to have to leave it there. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.